Antoine Morales stood in the center of his mansion at dawn, staring at the mess only his triplets could create. 3 nannies in 10 days had run out of this same hallway screaming for their lives. One left her shoes behind, one left her suitcase, and the last dropped a note on the floor begging never to be contacted again. Lee, Claudine, and Kimberly were at it again. The kitchen was wrecked. Flour on the counter. Juice on the floor. A broken bowl by the fridge. The girls were yelling about who started what, and Lee held a wooden spoon covered in what looked like ketchup, but the blood dripping from Claudine's nose said otherwise. Stephen, Antoine's right-hand man, stood frozen, unsure where to start. McNally, a man feared by grown criminals, stayed far from the chaos. Even he knew better than to approach the triplets when they were in this mood. But Antoine noticed something different today. The girls weren't just acting out, they were pushing harder than usual. Their voices were sharper, their tempers shorter. He knew exactly why. Tonight marked another year without their mother, a memory he never allowed himself to discuss. The girls sensed the tension even if he tried to hide it behind control and silence. Just as he tried to calm them, the doorbell rang. Antoine expected no visitor. When he opened the door, he found Ripley standing there, clutching a worn resume, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, and carrying a look that told him life had pushed her far. A broke single mom applying for a job everyone else refused. He almost turned her away. She looked too soft for his house. Too gentle for his daughters. Too unprepared for the madness she was walking into. But before Antoine could dismiss her, the triplets rushed forward with their usual attitude, trying to scare her off before she even stepped inside. Ripley didn't move. She didn't panic. She didn't step back. She walked straight past them into the destroyed kitchen, picked up a pan from the counter, and said, calm and steady, "Sit down. I'm making breakfast." The mansion went silent. And for the first time in months, the triplets actually listened. What do you think Ripley just stepped into, and why do you think the girls obeyed her so quickly? Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to All Time Tales. Tomorrow, another story is coming that you definitely don't want to miss. Now let me take you deeper into the story. By the second morning, the triplets were convinced Ripley's calm attitude was an act. No nanny survived more than 2 days, and they were determined to prove she wasn't different. Lee took the lead, as she usually did when the 3 planned something. She set up her first challenge in the hallway, an old prank she had used to chase away 2 previous nannies. Lee placed a small pan over a candle, hidden behind a door. Once the pan heated, a puff of smoke would rise through the crack. The goal was simple: make Ripley panic, call for help, or run out of the house. The girls waited around the corner, whispering and nudging each other. Ripley walked out of the study with a basket of laundry and headed straight toward the trap. The triplets leaned in, expecting the moment she would shout. But Ripley didn't panic. She noticed the smoke immediately, put down the basket, and kicked the door open with a firm push. She blew the candle out and picked up the pan with a towel. She turned toward the corner where the girls were hiding. "Lee," she said, not raising her voice, "this could start a real fire. Come fix it." The 3 froze. No one had ever called Lee out so directly, yet without anger. Lee stepped out slowly, waiting for a lecture or threat. Instead, Ripley handed her the towel. "Clean the area," she said. "You're smart enough to come up with better ways to get attention." Lee didn't know how to respond. She cleaned quietly, confused by Ripley's lack of fear. Claudine decided to try next. She planned a fake fall down the stairs, a dramatic performance she had mastered to perfection. She waited until Ripley walked past, then let out a loud cry and dropped to the floor. Her hand clutched her ankle, and she groaned loudly. Ripley turned back, kneeling beside her. Instead of panicking or rushing to call for help, she examined Claudine's ankle calmly. Claudine winced dramatically, expecting Ripley to panic and rush her to a doctor. Ripley touched the ankle lightly. "You're fine," she said. "Stand up." Claudine blinked. "It hurts." "No swelling. No marks." "You're okay," Ripley replied. Let's go. You still have homework. The act collapsed instantly. Claudine stood up, embarrassed but also strangely relieved that someone finally saw through her tricks. Ripley didn't guilt her or mock her, she simply refused to feed the drama. Kimberly watched all this closely. She wasn't as bold as Lee or as theatrical as Claudine, her strength was subtlety. She knew Ripley had gained confidence from handling the first 2 tests, so Kimberly went for the one thing she was sure no one could forgive: sneaking into Antoine's restricted office. The triplets knew that office was the one place Antoine guarded more than anything else. Kimberly slipped away while Ripley helped Lee pick up the hallway. She tiptoed to the heavy office door, picked the small latch she wasn't supposed to know about, and quietly stepped inside. She reached for one of Antoine's locked drawers, the one she always wondered about. Before she could touch it, Ripley appeared at the doorway. Kimberly jumped. "I told you earlier," Ripley said steadily. "There are places in this house you don't enter without permission." Kimberly froze, waiting for Ripley to yell. But Ripley didn't raise her voice. She stepped inside, closed the drawer Kimberly had reached for, and guided her out gently but firmly. "You're curious," Ripley said, "but curiosity doesn't mean you can go anywhere you want. Let's find something useful to do instead." Kimberly followed her out, quiet and thoughtful. No shouting. No threats. Just a clear boundary. By the time evening came, the girls gathered in the living room, unusually calm. They weren't fully obedient, far from it, but their usual wild edge had softened. They watched Ripley move around the room, organizing their things, settling the space, acting like she belonged there. For the first time, the triplets didn't see a nanny as an enemy. They saw someone who wouldn't be pushed away easily. Someone who didn't fear them. Someone who treated them like more than troublemakers. They didn't admit it out loud, but a subtle shift had begun. Ripley had earned the first layer of their respect. By the 3rd day, Ripley's presence in the mansion had begun changing things Antoine never expected. The girls woke earlier, followed instructions with less resistance, and argued less. They still had their moments, but the chaos that usually controlled the house had started to settle. Antoine noticed it each time he watched them from a distance. During breakfast, the girls sat together while Ripley prepared their plates. Instead of shouting across the table, they talked softly, mostly about school, chores, or what they wanted to do later. Ripley guided the conversation, giving each girl a chance to speak. Antoine stood in the doorway again, observing in silence. As he listened, something struck him. His daughters were speaking more than usual. Not just words, but thoughts. Opinions. Feelings they normally hid behind stubborn silence or loud arguments. Ripley didn't push them. She simply made space for them to talk, and they responded. Later in the day, Ripley joined the girls in their study area. Antoine lingered in the hallway, keeping out of sight. She helped Claudine with a math assignment, checked Kimberly's reading list, and asked Lee about a school project. The girls answered willingly, sometimes even enthusiastically. Antoine felt something tighten in his chest. He realized how little he had been part of these moments. He provided protection, structure, and everything money could buy, but he wasn't present in the way they needed. Ripley's ease with them highlighted that gap more clearly than anything else. That afternoon, the shift became even more obvious. The girls approached Ripley with a question they rarely voiced aloud. "Did you know our mom?" Lee asked softly. Ripley looked surprised but remained calm. "No. I didn't know her." Claudine hesitated before speaking. "Why doesn't Dad tell us about her?" Ripley paused. She glanced toward the hallway, toward the spot where Antoine stood completely still. He hadn't planned to overhear this. He never liked discussing the past, especially not with the girls. He avoided it out of fear he wouldn't know how to explain it. But hearing his daughters ask someone else cut deeper than he expected. Ripley answered gently. "Some memories are hard for people to talk about. It doesn't mean he doesn't care." The girls weren't satisfied. Kimberly folded her arms. "He never says anything." Claudine nodded. "He just gets angry." Antoine's jaw tightened. He hated being the reason they felt shut out. Ripley noticed the tension but continued carefully. "You're allowed to be curious," she said. "And one day, he may be ready to tell you more." The girls fell quiet, but their eyes carried questions they weren't brave enough to ask directly. Antoine stepped away from the hallway before they noticed him. The conversation stayed with him long after he left. That evening, the shift grew heavier when McNally knocked on Antoine's study door. The man looked troubled, something he rarely showed. "We've got a problem," McNally said. Antoine straightened. "What kind?" McNally placed a small folder on the desk. Inside was a set of photos, grainy shots taken from a distance. Ripley and the girls walking outside the mansion gate. Ripley holding Claudine's hand. Lee kicking a stone on the sidewalk. Kimberly laughing. Antoine felt his pulse rise. Where did these come from? "Someone's watching the house," McNally replied. "We don't know who yet, but the timing is too close to ignore. They've been following the new nanny." Antoine didn't answer right away. He stared at the photos again. The angle. The distance. The fact that someone had captured Ripley's face clearly. His mind raced. Was she connected to someone? Sent by someone? Had he let his guard down because she seemed harmless? McNally spoke again. "I'm not saying she's involved, but someone out there is paying attention to her. To the girls. That's not random." Antoine closed the folder. A storm built inside him. Fear, suspicion, frustration. Ripley had brought calm into his home, but now she was tied to a threat he didn't understand. For the first time since she arrived, Antoine felt his control slipping. And he hated that it frightened him more than he wanted to admit. Night fell quietly over the Morales estate, but the silence inside the mansion was anything but calm. Antoine sat alone in his study, the lights dimmed, the folder McNally had given him resting on the desk like a weight he couldn't ignore. The surveillance photo lay at the top, a clear shot of Ripley holding Claudine's hand as they walked back toward the mansion gate. The girls looked carefree. Ripley looked alert, as if she sensed something watching them. Antoine stared at the image, his mind drowning in questions that grew darker by the minute. Ripley had been too skilled the night she arrived. Too sharp. Too composed. She had gained the girls' trust too quickly. She had earned his curiosity too easily. Antoine had lived his life surrounded by threats. Enemies used kindness, patience, and appearance as weapons. Trust was a luxury he had never allowed himself. And now, someone had captured a perfect photo of Ripley and the children. Too perfect. Too deliberate. He closed the folder with a hard snap. He was done wondering. He needed answers. Ripley was helping the girls settle into bed when Antoine finally stepped into the hallway. The triplets were already under their blankets, whispering among themselves. Antoine watched from the doorway for a moment, Ripley adjusting Lee's pillow, smoothing Kimberly's hair, reminding Claudine to leave the lamp on if she planned to read. It felt like she'd been there for months, not days. When Ripley turned and noticed him, her expression softened in acknowledgement. "All settled," she said quietly. "Good," Antoine replied, his tone flat. Something in his voice made her pause. The triplets sensed it too. Lee looked up. Kimberly's smile faded. Claudine's eyes shifted between them. Ripley stepped out of the room and gently closed the door behind her. Antoine motioned down the hall. "Walk with me." She followed without protest. They entered the study. Antoine closed the door. The air tightened instantly. Ripley stood still, hands loosely clasped in front of her, as Antoine approached the desk and placed the surveillance photo on top. She saw it immediately. Her brows drew together, but not in guilt. In shock. "Where did you get that?" she asked softly. Antoine didn't answer the question. Instead, he stepped closer. "You told me you came here by accident," he said. "That you were caught in something you didn't understand. That you wanted a chance to survive." "I did." He nodded once. "Then explain why someone out there finds you worth photographing. Explain why they're watching you. Explain why they're watching my daughters. Ripley inhaled slowly. Antoine, someone else took that picture. Not me. That's not what I asked. Her eyes narrowed, not in defiance, but in hurt. You think I sent it? I think I don't know you, Antoine replied. Not enough to trust you around them. Ripley's jaw tightened. It wasn't anger. It was frustration blended with something much deeper. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged before she could defend herself. She stepped toward the desk and placed her fingertips on the edge of the photo. If I wanted to harm your daughters, she said, voice steady, I wouldn't have stopped Lee from sneaking out the gate 2 nights ago. I wouldn't have caught Kimberly in your office. I wouldn't have spent half the day helping Claudine with schoolwork she said you never have time for. Antoine stiffened. Ripley continued, not raising her voice, not backing down. If I were here to betray you, I wouldn't be putting myself at risk every time I walk with them outside. Whoever took that picture wasn't following me. They were following the girls. I just happened to be beside them. Antoine didn't respond immediately. He looked at her, not at her hands, not at her posture, but at her eyes. He had spent his life reading lies, decoding threats, uncovering schemes. Ripley wasn't hiding anything. She wasn't even defending herself. She was defending the girls. And that unsettled him more than the photo ever could. Finally, he exhaled. But he wasn't ready to let go of suspicion. Until I know who took that picture, he said, you don't take the girls outside. Not alone. Not even for a minute. Ripley nodded. I understand. She moved toward the door but paused before opening it. Antoine, she said quietly, I didn't bring danger to your home. But if danger is coming, then we need to be honest with each other. She left before he could respond. Antoine stared at the closed door. For the first time, he wasn't sure if his fear was about Ripley, or about the possibility that he had pushed away the one person who could help him protect his family. The house was quiet the next morning, but Ripley carried a heaviness she could no longer push aside. Antoine had barely spoken to her since showing her the surveillance photo. The girls sensed the tension instantly. Lee stayed close to the kitchen doorway, Claudine barely touched her breakfast, and Kimberly watched Ripley with questions she was too afraid to ask. Ripley knew she couldn't allow suspicion to hang in the air any longer. Not when the girls were already carrying more than they ever deserved. Not when Antoine was shutting himself off again. So when Antoine passed through the hallway on his way to the study, Ripley followed. Antoine, she said softly. He stopped but didn't turn. We need to talk. He faced her then, his expression unreadable. About the photo. About everything. He allowed a pause, then stepped into the study and motioned for her to enter. Ripley walked in, closed the door behind her, and finally let the truth rise to the surface. I knew someone from your world, she began. Years ago. Antoine didn't move, but the shift in his eyes was unmistakable. Who? Ripley clasped her hands tightly. My son's father. Silence filled the room. Not cold, just heavy. He wasn't like you, she continued. He didn't lead anything. He worked under people who wanted power, money, control. He did things I never fully understood. I only knew he was dangerous when it was too late. Antoine's jaw tensed. You were involved with a member of one of my rival crews. Yes, Ripley admitted. But I left before our son was born. I never asked where he disappeared to. I didn't want my child anywhere near that world. Antoine stepped closer. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you would have sent me away, she replied. And I needed this job. I needed a way to feed my son. I wasn't trying to hide anything to hurt you or the girls. I was trying to survive. Her voice cracked, not from fear of Antoine, but from the exhaustion of carrying her past alone for too long. Antoine didn't interrupt. You want the truth? The reason I came here despite all the warnings is because this was the only job I could get without someone running a background check and slamming a door in my face. I wasn't planted here. I've never worked for anyone connected to that life. I walked away as soon as I realized the kind of man I was with. Antoine's eyes softened, just slightly. So the man you were involved with, he's connected to one of my enemies? Yes, Ripley said. But he's not part of my life. He hasn't been for years. I never told him about my son. I never told him where I lived. I barely told him my real name. Antoine wasn't used to someone speaking openly with him. Most people offered half-truths, guarded words, or carefully shaped answers. Ripley wasn't shaping anything. She was holding her heart in her hands and hoping he wouldn't turn it into a weapon. "Why did you stay?" he asked quietly, after seeing what the girls were like. "Most people leave before sundown." "Because they're hurting," Ripley answered instantly. "Because they remind me of what my son could become if no one stands beside him. Because they don't need perfection. They just need someone who won't run." Antoine inhaled deeply but didn't look away from her. "And you're not afraid of what being here might bring back from your past?" "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But fear didn't keep me safe before, and it won't protect the girls now. I'm staying because someone in this house has to be steady." Antoine exhaled slowly. For the first time since Ripley arrived, something in him shifted, the smallest break in the wall he kept around himself. "The girls care about you," he said. "More than they've cared about anyone since their mother." Ripley swallowed. "I care about them too." Antoine looked away, his voice low. "That's what worries me." Ripley didn't know how to answer that. She waited, hoping he would continue, but Antoine stepped past her and opened the door. "We'll revisit this later," he said. "For now, stay close to the girls." She nodded and left the room, but the conversation lingered between them like something unfinished. Something that would change everything in the hours ahead. The tension inside the mansion grew heavier by the hour. Ripley could feel it in every hallway, in every uneasy glance exchanged between the triplets. The girls were acting quieter than usual, which wasn't a good sign. Silence with them never meant peace. Silence meant emotions stacked too high to carry. By late afternoon, the pressure finally cracked. Lee stormed into the living room where Antoine was reviewing documents. Her steps were fast, angry, and impossible to ignore. Claudine and Kimberly followed behind her, unsure whether to stop her or support her. "Why don't you ever talk to us?" Lee demanded. Antoine didn't look up immediately, which only fueled her anger. When he finally raised his eyes, she was shaking. "What is this about?" he asked. "You tell everyone what to do except us," Lee fired back. "You walk through the house like we're invisible unless one of us messes up." "Watch your tone," Antoine warned. "Why? It's the only time you hear us." Claudine flinched at Lee's voice. Kimberly tugged at her own sleeves, the same nervous habit Ripley had noticed since her first day. Antoine set his papers aside. "Lee, sit." "No. You can't order us around every second and still act like you don't know anything about us." Her voice cracked. "We're your daughters." Claudine's breath hitched, and Ripley saw her crumble before anyone else realized it was happening. Her eyes filled quickly, too quickly to hide. "We try," Claudine whispered. "We try so hard to make you see us." Antoine's expression shifted, but he didn't speak. "You don't even ask what we like anymore," Claudine continued. "You don't ask what scares us. You don't even say goodnight." Kimberly stood perfectly still, but her voice shook as she stepped forward. "We thought maybe you didn't want us." "Not really." Antoine's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with something deeper, something he had never learned to show in front of his children. "Who told you that?" he asked. Kimberly looked down. "Nobody had to." Lee wiped her eyes aggressively, refusing to let tears betray her anger. "You disappear into your office every night. You shut the door. We hear you pacing. We hear McNally telling you things in low voices. We hear the phone calls. We're not small anymore. We understand more than you think. You don't understand everything, Antoine argued. Because you won't tell us anything. Lee stepped closer. You won't tell us why Mom died. You won't tell us why people watch the house. You won't tell us why you look at the front gate like something is always coming. Antoine's breath caught. Ripley watched from the doorway, knowing this wasn't the moment to step in. This was between a father and the daughters he loved but didn't know how to hold without breaking. Claudine finally lost control. She covered her face with her hands, crying harder than Ripley had seen from any of them. "We're scared," she confessed through trembling fingers. "We're scared you're going to leave us the way Mom did, just not by choice." Antoine froze. Completely. Kimberly's voice was barely a whisper. "We think you're trying to stay away from us because it hurts to remember her." Antoine swallowed sharply. Lee, angry as she was, softened just a little. "We don't need you to be perfect. We just need you to show up." The room fell into a long, raw silence. Antoine stood there like someone who had been hit with the truth he'd been running from for years. Finally, he spoke. "I never wanted to make you feel unwanted." Claudine's crying softened, but she didn't lift her head. "I didn't know how to," he paused, searching for words he wasn't used to saying in front of anyone. "I didn't know how to be around you without feeling like I failed your mother. I thought keeping distance would keep you safe from the things that come with my life." Kimberly stepped closer. "We don't want distance. We want a dad." Antoine looked at all three of them, really looked at them, and Ripley saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, fear of losing them without ever realizing it. "I'm trying," he said quietly. "I just don't always know how." Lee wiped her face one more time, then said, "Start by not walking away every time things get hard." Antoine nodded once. "I can do that." It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't a healed moment. But it was the first real moment they'd had as a family in years. Ripley stepped back from the doorway, giving them space they desperately needed. But deep inside, she felt something shift, something none of them were ready for. The storm outside the family was about to hit harder than anything happening inside. The night fell on Kenilworth like any other, quiet but heavy with anticipation. Ripley was helping the triplets set up a bedtime reading routine, their earlier confrontation with Antoine leaving a fragile calm in the mansion. Antoine himself had retreated to his study, pretending to work, though his mind lingered on the argument and the weight of questions the girls had asked. Suddenly, a sharp noise outside cut through the stillness, metal scraping against the driveway, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to breach the property. McNally's instincts kicked in instantly. "Everyone stay down," he ordered, his voice low and commanding. Stephen grabbed his sidearm and moved toward the front door with precise, practiced steps. Ripley froze for a second, the triplets huddled around her. She had never been trained for this, never imagined a moment like this when her greatest threats had been misbehaving 5-year-olds. But the fear in the girl's eyes snapped something into focus. She positioned herself between them and the entrance, her arms wrapping around the children protectively. The front door rattled under a heavy push. Antoine appeared from the study, moving with calm authority. McNally and Stephen were already at strategic points, scanning the property. "Who is it?" Antoine barked, his usual control now mixed with genuine concern for the girls. A shadow moved across the front gate. Stephen recognized the pattern immediately. "Ambush," he muttered. "They've been watching. Waiting." Ripley's heart raced. She realized quickly that her presence here, her bond with the triplets, might be the reason this attack had escalated. Whoever targeted the mansion might assume she was part of it, or that she could be manipulated. She tightened her stance around the girls, refusing to let fear dominate. The first intruder made it past the gate, crouching low. McNally intercepted immediately, a swift and controlled confrontation that neutralized the threat before it could reach the mansion walls. Stephen was on the other side, blocking another entry point. Ripley acted without hesitation. She led the triplets toward a more secure room, using her own body as a shield whenever the intruders fired warning shots. The sound of gunfire and shouting echoed through the halls, but the girls felt a strange sense of security. They could trust her. Through the chaos, Antoine's eyes kept finding Ripley. She moved with purpose, protecting what mattered most, staying calm despite her lack of experience. He saw her dodge, deflect, and position the triplets out of harm's way, all while maintaining clear-headed decisions in a situation that could have overwhelmed anyone else. Minutes felt like hours. Each attack was precise, testing the mansion's security, but McNally and Stephen's presence, combined with Ripley's protective actions, contained the chaos. Eventually, the remaining intruders retreated, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had arrived. Once the immediate threat passed, the mansion fell into tense silence. The triplets clung to Ripley, their trust in her solidified through the ordeal. Antoine approached, eyes scanning his daughters' faces, then locking on Ripley. He realized what he had witnessed. Her loyalty was genuine, unshakable. She had chosen their safety over her own, proving she was not the enemy he had feared she might be. Ripley straightened, brushing imaginary dust from her borrowed clothes, though she was shaken. "They're okay," she said simply, gesturing to the girls. "No one's hurt." Antoine's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, carrying weight he rarely let show. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," Ripley replied. "Because they're your daughters. And because someone had to make sure they stayed safe while everyone else was focused on what they didn't understand." McNally and Stephen exchanged a glance. Respect for Ripley had grown silently but significantly. She had proven that despite being new, despite being untrained for violence, she had the instincts, courage, and decisiveness required to protect these children. The girls peeked from behind Ripley's legs, wide-eyed but smiling faintly. "Thank you," Lee whispered. Claudine nodded, and Kimberly simply hugged Ripley's leg, her small hands gripping tightly. Antoine, watching quietly, felt something shift inside him. He had underestimated her in every possible way, her bravery, her intelligence, her ability to remain calm under pressure. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps this outsider could help him not just protect, but reconnect with his children in a meaningful way. He approached Ripley slowly, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You did more than I could have expected," he said. "I see now what the girls see." Ripley met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not here for your business, Antoine. I'm here for them. And if you're willing to let me, I'll help them feel safe, not just today, but every day." For the first time since the girl's mother had passed, Antoine allowed a quiet nod. The mansion, though scarred by the night's chaos, felt different, closer to what a home should feel like. And in the center of it all, Ripley had become more than a nanny. She had become the bridge between a father and the daughters he feared he might lose. The morning after the attack, Kenilworth felt unusually quiet. The triplets moved carefully through the mansion, still carrying the tension from the previous night, but with Ripley nearby, their confidence had grown. Antoine watched them from the study window, his expression unreadable, fingers tapping lightly against the polished wood. The events of the night weighed heavily on him, revealing truths he could no longer ignore. He realized that all his security, all his wealth, all his control, could never replace what the girls truly needed. Protection alone was not enough. They needed a father who was present, who listened, who showed up without fear or calculation. Antoine had spent years hiding behind authority, ensuring that the world feared him, while neglecting the emotional needs of the three most important people in his life. Ripley entered the study, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Antoine's inner turmoil. "They're doing better," she said softly. "But they need more than rules and boundaries now. They need to feel you're here for them, not just physically, but truly here." Antoine didn't respond immediately. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking back to the argument with Lee, Claudine's tears, Kimberly's fears. The reality of his absence hit harder than any business threat ever could. Finally, he spoke. I've been wrong. I've been so focused on keeping them safe that I forgot they needed me in ways I couldn't protect with money or muscle." Ripley nodded, encouraging but careful. "It's not too late. They want to hear from you, understand the truth. They're ready, if you are. Antoine took a deep breath and called the girls into the study. Lee, Claudine, and Kimberly hesitated, sensing the weight of the moment. Ripley remained behind, close enough to offer support, but giving Antoine the space to step forward. He began slowly, carefully choosing his words. "I need to tell you the truth about your mother," he said, voice steady but tinged with emotion. The girls listened, eyes wide, absorbing each syllable. "Isabella didn't leave because of you. She became sick. A disease that made her forget things, even us. She wanted you to remember her as the mother who loved you, not the one who suffered before you could understand." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of that revelation sinking in. Tears formed in Claudine's eyes, Lee's jaw tightened, and Kimberly's small hands trembled. Antoine continued, "I promised her I would protect you, and I tried, but I failed in some ways. I wasn't there emotionally. I focused on everything else and forgot the most important part, being your father, not just your protector." Ripley stepped forward gently. "They've already started trusting you in ways they never did before. It's not about perfection, it's about showing up, every day. They need your presence, your honesty, your attention." Antoine nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He knelt to be at eye level with the triplets. "I want to be here for you, truly. To listen, to help, to laugh with you, to guide you. Not just protect you from the world, but help you navigate it. I can't change the past, but I can start being the father you deserve." Lee stepped forward cautiously. "Will you stay? Even when things are hard?" Antoine's hand rested on her small shoulder. "Every day," he said firmly. "No matter what happens outside these walls, I'll be here with you." Claudine's tears fell freely now, and Antoine pulled her into a gentle embrace. Kimberly wrapped herself around his other side, and for the first time in years, the three girls felt his attention undivided, his love present without distraction. Ripley smiled quietly, knowing her role had shifted. She had helped open a door for the family, provided the bridge between past pain and future healing. Now her job was to support, to encourage, to guide the process, giving the Morales family space to rebuild trust, love, and connection. The mansion, once a place of tension and conflict, felt warmer that morning. The triplets laughed softly as Antoine began a small game of storytelling, prompting them to join in. Ripley watched from a nearby chair, allowing herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The chaos of the past weeks had given way to an uncertain but promising peace, and the foundation for a stronger bond between father and daughters was finally taking shape. Antoine looked at Ripley, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. Ripley shook her head. "No, they're the ones who did all the work. I just made sure you saw it." The Morales family sat together in the study that morning, a temporary calm settling over the mansion. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, the three daughters had the father they needed, and Antoine had begun the journey to becoming the parent he had long avoided being. Antoine sat in the private room of the mansion, the city lights spilling faintly through the tall windows. The message had come quietly, but the threat was unmistakable: remove Ripley from the house, or face consequences from the families that had long watched his empire. It was a demand meant to test his control, his judgment, and his priorities. Ripley, unaware of the latest warning, had spent the morning preparing breakfast for the triplets. Lee, Claudine, and Kimberly giggled at something minor, their laughter carrying through the halls. The sound, normally unnoticed by Antoine, hit him differently today. It reminded him what he was risking if he obeyed the ultimatum. When Ripley learned of the threat, her resolve hardened. She stood before Antoine, her voice steady, though her eyes reflected concern. "I'm not leaving them. I came here for their safety, and I won't abandon them, no matter what anyone says. If I go, they lose more than a caretaker, they lose someone they trust." The triplets had gathered behind her, expressions defiant. Lee spoke first. "If Ripley leaves, we're leaving too. We won't stay without her." Claudine's voice trembled slightly, but she nodded in agreement. Kimberly, usually quiet, added, We don't care what anyone else says. She's ours. Antoine's jaw tightened. The room was filled with tension, yet it was not just fear or anger, it was a challenge he could not ignore. He had built an empire on control, on making decisions that shaped the city, but this was different. This was about family, about the future of the three girls who had unknowingly demanded more from him than anyone ever had. He thought of his enemies, their expectations, and the potential fallout. Ignoring them entirely was dangerous, and complying could destroy the trust he was slowly rebuilding. Ripley's calm defiance and the girl's unwavering stance forced Antoine to consider something he had rarely allowed himself to: putting the family first, above all else. The room remained silent for a long moment. Antoine finally spoke, his voice measured but firm. "No one threatens this house. No one threatens them. Ripley, you stay. The girls are not alone. And anyone who wants to interfere will deal with me." Ripley's eyes widened slightly, gratitude and relief mixing with the realization of what he had just declared. The triplets erupted in quiet cheers, rushing forward to hug both Ripley and their father. Antoine allowed himself a small smile, feeling the weight of responsibility in a way that was unfamiliar but necessary. Outside the mansion, the city continued unaware of the silent standoff, the decision that could have escalated into chaos. Inside, the Morales family had already drawn a line that no outsider could cross. Ripley had not only gained a place in the household but had become a shield, an anchor for the three girls. Antoine turned away from the window, facing the kitchen where Ripley had returned to her duties, small movements deliberate, caring. The presence of someone willing to stand with his daughters, rather than behind rules or fear, was a new reality. It unsettled him in ways he hadn't expected, but it also offered hope, a glimpse of a life that could be more than control and power. For the first time, Antoine considered the possibility that protecting them wasn't just about walls, guards, or threats. It was about presence, trust, and courage, the courage to defy even those he had long feared. And in that moment, he understood the stakes clearly. He would not let anyone take this from him, this fragile but growing bond with the daughters he had struggled to understand. The first confrontation with the world outside his mansion was settled, but Antoine knew the real tests had only begun. Ripley's role in the household was no longer negotiable, and the girls' safety depended on him making decisions that could fracture alliances, challenge old loyalties, and force him to balance empire against family. The true conflict was not just about survival, it was about defining what he was willing to fight for.